Bullies try to steal the quiet kid's seat. Big mistake. He was a VALE TUDO champion. Ezra Nakamura sat quietly in the back corner of Jefferson High's overcrowded cafeteria, methodically eating his sandwich while observing the chaos around him. At 17, his slight frame and reserved demeanor made him nearly invisible among the sea of boisterous teenagers. His black hair fell across his dark eyes, creating a natural shield that he'd learned to hide behind during his 3 months. At this new school, moving from São Paulo to Portland had been difficult enough without the added challenge of fitting into an established social hierarchy that seemed determined to keep him at the bottom. The cafeteria buzzed with typical high school energy. Friends, catching up, couples flirting, athletes boasting about weekend games. Ezra watched it all with the detached interest of an outsider, his fingers unconsciously tracing the small scar on his knuckle, a reminder of countless hours spent in his uncle's MMA gym back in Brazil. Here nobody knew about the years of VALE TUDO training, the regional championships, or the discipline that had shaped him into something far more dangerous than his quiet exterior suggested. Just blend in, he reminded himself, the same mantra he'd repeated every morning for weeks. Keep your head down, finish school, avoid trouble. His uncle's voice echoed in his memory. A true fighter knows when not to fight, Ezra. Your hands are weapons now. Use them wisely. The peace shattered when Marcus Rivera and his crew approached. Marcus was everything Ezra wasn't. Tall, muscular, with the swagger of someone who'd never been challenged. His lieutenant, Tyler Brooks, flanked him on the right, while Danny Ortega completed the triangle of intimidation on the left. They were Jefferson High's unofficial enforcers, the type who ruled through fear and had never met real consequences. Well, well, Marcus announced loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. Look who's sitting in our spot again. Ezra looked up slowly, meeting Marcus's cold stare. I didn't know seats were assigned in the cafeteria. The response drew snickers from nearby students, but Marcus's expression darkened. Everything's assigned when I say it is, foreign boy. You've been warned twice already. Foreign boy. The casual racism stung, but Ezra had heard worse. He'd also learned that reacting only made things escalate. I'll move, he said simply, beginning to gather his things. Too late for that, Tyler interjected, his voice carrying that particular cruelty teenagers perfected. You should have listened the first time. Before Ezra could react, Danny swept his arm across the table, sending his lunch tray crashing to the floor. Chocolate milk splashed across his jeans, and his sandwich exploded into pieces that scattered under neighboring tables. The cafeteria fell silent for a moment before erupting in laughter and jeers. Oops, Danny said with exaggerated innocence. Clumsy me. Ezra stared at the mess, feeling heat rise in his chest, his hands clenched involuntarily, muscle memory from hundreds of training sessions threatening to take over. He could see exactly how it would play out. A quick jab to Danny's solar plexus, an elbow to Tyler's temple, a takedown that would leave Marcus questioning his life choices. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Instead, he knelt and began collecting the scattered food. Accidents happen, he murmured. Marcus laughed. Look at him, guys. Kid's got no fight in him at all. He placed his foot on Ezra's shoulder and shoved, sending him sprawling into the spilled milk. Stay down there where you belong, immigrant. The crowd's laughter felt like physical blows. Ezra remained on his knees, cleaning methodically while fury burned in his stomach. He caught glimpses of other students. Some looked away in embarrassment, others pulled out phones to record his humiliation. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch monitor, was conveniently looking elsewhere. Not yet, he told himself. Uncle Miguel would be disappointed if you threw away everything for this. Marcus kicked some crumbs toward Ezra's face. From now on, you find somewhere else to eat. This section's for Americans only. They walked away laughing, high-fiving each other while Ezra finished cleaning in silence. When he finally stood, his clothes stained and dignity battered, he noticed one person still watching, Sarah Kim, a quiet junior who sat alone most days. She gave him a small, sympathetic nod before quickly looking away. The rest of the day passed in a blur of sideways glances and whispered comments. In chemistry class, someone had written "loser" on his lab station. During gym, Coach Williams accidentally paired him with Marcus for wrestling practice, resulting in several accidental, odd throws that left Ezra's ribs aching. The pattern was clear. His humiliation was entertainment, and Marcus had appointed himself director of the show. Walking home through Jefferson's tree-lined streets, Ezra tried to process what his life had become. In São Paulo, he'd been respected, even feared in certain circles. At 17, he'd already won 3 regional VALE TUDO tournaments and was being scouted by professional organizations. His uncle's gym had been his second home, a place where respect was earned through dedication and skill, not inherited through size or attitude. But here, none of that mattered. Here, he was just another immigrant kid trying not to make waves. His parents had sacrificed everything for this move, believing American education would provide opportunities Brazil couldn't offer. They worked double shifts at the hospital, his mother as a nurse, his father as a technician, dreaming of a better future for their son. Disappointing them wasn't an option. Still, as he traced the familiar route to his small apartment, Ezra couldn't shake the image of Marcus's smug face or the sound of Tyler's laughter. More troubling was how easily the other students had joined, in how quickly human decency had dissolved in the face of mob mentality. That evening, while his parents worked late, Ezra stood before his bedroom mirror practicing forms he hadn't used in months. His body remembered every movement, the precise footwork, the devastating combinations, the seamless transitions between striking and grappling that made VALE TUDO so effective. In the reflection, he didn't look like Jefferson High's favorite punching bag. He looked like what he really was, a weapon disguised as prey. The next morning brought new humiliations. Someone had taped a sign to his locker reading, "Kick me," in both English and badly Google-translated Portuguese. In first period, Tyler accidentally spilled coffee on Ezra's notebook, destroying weeks of chemistry notes. During lunch, the pattern repeated. Marcus's crew claimed the table, forced him to move, then followed to make his new spot equally uncomfortable. "You know what your problem is," Marcus said, cornering Ezra near the vending machines. "You think you're better than us just because you've got that mysterious foreign thing going on? Some girls might find it interesting, but I see right through you." Ezra said nothing, which only seemed to inflame Marcus further. "You're weak," Marcus continued, jabbing a finger into Ezra's chest. "Pathetic. In my country, we call guys like you cowards. In my country, we call guys like you unconscious." Ezra thought but didn't say. Instead, he stepped back, hands raised peacefully. "I don't want any trouble. Too bad trouble found you anyway." The harassment continued for days, becoming more creative and public. His gym bag was dumped in the hallway, spilling clothes and equipment while students stepped over him. His textbooks were borrowed and returned with pages torn out. Someone started a group chat called Ezra Watch, dedicated to documenting his daily humiliations. Through it all, Ezra maintained his composure, though the effort was becoming harder each day. He found himself waking up with clenched fists, dreaming of combinations that would put Marcus and his friends in the hospital. The voice of restraint, his uncle's teachings about honor and responsibility, grew quieter with each passing humiliation. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday morning in the hallway outside the gymnasium. Ezra was walking to first period when Marcus appeared with his usual entourage, but this time they'd brought reinforcements. 6 seniors, all from the football team, formed a loose circle around him. "Heard you've been telling people you could take me in a fight," Marcus said, his voice carrying down the hallway. "I never said that," Ezra replied calmly, though his pulse quickened. This felt different, more dangerous than their usual encounters. "Calling me a liar now?" Marcus stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Ezra. "That's disrespectful, foreign boy. Maybe it's time someone taught you some manners." The circle tightened. Other students gathered to watch, creating a larger ring of spectators. Ezra noticed phones coming out, ready to capture whatever happened next. Mrs. Henderson, the hall monitor, was nowhere to be seen. "I'm not looking for a fight," Ezra said, but his stance subtly shifted, weight moving to the balls of his feet. "Good thing I am." Marcus shoved him hard, sending Ezra stumbling backward into Tyler's waiting arms. Tyler grabbed Ezra's shoulders and spun him around, shoving him toward Danny, who repeated the motion. They began passing him back and forth, like a human volleyball, each shove harder than the last, while the crowd laughed and recorded. "Stop!" Ezra said, his voice still controlled but carrying a warning edge that none of them recognized. "Or what?" Marcus caught him mid-stumble and held him steady, his face inches away. "You'll tell. The principal. Run crying to Mommy and Daddy?" The racial undertone was clear, and something cold settled in Ezra's stomach. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, began to curl into the proper positioning his uncle had drilled into him thousands of times. "Let me go," he said quietly. "Make me." Marcus shoved him one final time, sending Ezra crashing into a bank of lockers. The metallic clang echoed through the hallway as his shoulder struck the combination locks. Pain shot down his arm, but more importantly, something inside him finally snapped. The crowd cheered, expecting him to slide down the lockers in defeat, as he had so many times before. Instead, Ezra pushed himself away from the metal surface and turned around slowly. When he looked up, his eyes held something that hadn't been there moments before, a cold, calculating fury that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. "You want to fight?" Ezra asked, his voice carrying an accent that suddenly sounded less foreign and more dangerous. "Let's fight." The transformation was immediate and shocking. Gone was the quiet, submissive target they'd been tormenting for months. In his place stood someone who moved with the fluid confidence of a trained predator. Ezra's shoulders rolled back, his stance widened, and his hands came up in a guard position that looked nothing like the amateur boxing most of them had seen. Marcus hesitated, clearly not expecting this response, but his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of so many witnesses. "Finally grew some balls, huh?" He raised his own fists in a sloppy imitation of a boxer's stance. "This is gonna hurt." He lunged forward with a wild haymaker, the kind of telegraphed punch that might work against other untrained teenagers. Ezra sidestepped with minimal effort, his body moving like water around the clumsy attack. As Marcus stumbled past, off balance from his missed swing, Ezra's elbow found his ribs with surgical precision. The sound was audible. A dull thud followed. By Marcus's sharp intake of breath, he staggered, clutching his side, confusion replacing confidence on his face. "What the hell?" Tyler started to say, but Ezra was already moving. A quick jab snapped Tyler's head back, followed immediately by a leg sweep that sent him crashing to the floor. The technique was textbook VALE TUDO, efficient, brutal, and over, before Tyler understood what had happened. The crowd's cheering died into shocked silence. This wasn't the pathetic victim they'd been expecting to see beaten down. This was something else entirely. Danny, seeing his friends neutralized in seconds, rushed forward with more caution but no more skill. Ezra caught his punch, twisted his arm behind his back, and drove him face first into the same lockers where Marcus had shoved him moments before. Danny dropped like a stone, dazed and bleeding from his nose. Marcus, still clutching his ribs, stared in disbelief. "You! What are you?" Ezra walked toward him slowly, his movements controlled and purposeful. The other football players who had formed the original circle suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere, melting away from what had become a very different situation than they'd anticipated. "I'm someone you should have left alone," Ezra said simply. Marcus swung again. Desperation. Overriding technique. This time, Ezra didn't just avoid the punch. He caught Marcus's wrist, stepped inside his guard, and delivered a palm strike to his chest that sent him flying backward into the growing crowd of spectators. Students scattered as Marcus hit the ground hard, gasping for air. But Ezra wasn't finished. Months of accumulated humiliation, racism, and rage demanded more than a quick technical victory. As Marcus struggled to stand, Ezra grabbed the front of his shirt and hauled him upright. "You wanted to teach me manners?" Ezra's voice was deadly quiet. "Let me return the favor. A knee strike to Marcus's midsection doubled him over. An uppercut straightened him back up. A combination of body shots that would have made his uncle proud left Marcus swaying on his feet, held upright only by Ezra's grip on his shirt. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their former tormentor was systematically dismantled by someone they'd dismissed as weak. Phone cameras captured every moment as Marcus, the untouchable bully, was reduced to a battered, helpless victim. "Please," Marcus gasped, blood running from his split lip. "Stop." Ezra paused, studying the face that had haunted his last few months. All the power, all the casual cruelty, all the racist jokes, gone, replaced by genuine fear and pain. For a moment, the old Ezra warred with something darker that the bullying had awakened. He could keep going, end it permanently, make sure Marcus never bothered anyone again. Instead, he released his grip, letting Marcus collapse to his knees. "We're done," Ezra announced, his voice carrying, clearly through the silent hallway. "All of us. Forever." He looked around at the faces staring back at him, some shocked, some afraid, some impressed. Tyler was still on the ground, groaning and holding his jaw. Danny sat against the lockers, pressing his sleeve to his bleeding nose. Marcus knelt in the center of it all, defeated and humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to him. "Anyone else want to call me foreign boy?" Ezra asked the crowd. No one responded. Principal Williams chose that moment to arrive, pushing through the gathered students with the exhausted expression of someone who dealt with too many hallway incidents. He took in the scene. 3 battered students, one standing victorious, and dozens of witnesses with their phones out. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Self-defense," Sarah Kim said from the edge of the crowd, her voice clear and confident. Marcus and his friends attacked Ezra. "First, we all saw it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the spectators. Even students who had laughed at Ezra's previous humiliations nodded their confirmation. The phones that had been recording his defeat had instead captured his triumph. Principal Williams sighed. "Everyone to class. Now, Ezra, Marcus, Tyler, Danny, my office." As the crowd dispersed, whispers following in their wake, Ezra felt the adrenaline beginning to fade. His knuckles ached from the impacts, and his shoulder throbbed where it had hit the lockers. But underneath the physical discomfort was something he hadn't felt in months: respect. Students who had previously looked through him now stepped aside. As he passed, the subtle nods, the wide-eyed stares, the way conversations stopped when he approached, it was completely different from the dismissive treatment he'd endured since arriving at Jefferson High. The principal's office meeting was brief and predictable. Marcus and his friends, sporting various bruises and injured pride, claimed Ezra had attacked them unprovoked, but the phone footage told a different story, and Principal Williams had seen enough bullying incidents to recognize the pattern. "This ends now," he told all 4 boys. "Marcus, Tyler, Danny, you're suspended for 3 days for assault and harassment. There will also be a formal investigation into the discriminatory language multiple witnesses reported. Ezra, while I understand you were defending yourself, violence is never the answer we want to see. 1-day detention, and I'm recommending anger management counseling." It was barely a slap on the wrist, and everyone knew it. More importantly, word of what had happened was already spreading through Jefferson High's social networks. By lunch, the video had been shared dozens of times, with commentary ranging from shocked disbelief to grudging admiration. The cafeteria was a different world when Ezra entered for lunch. Conversations stopped as he walked past tables. But this time, the silence carried weight instead of mockery. He made his way to his usual corner table, the one Marcus had claimed was for Americans only, and sat down with his brown bag lunch. Nobody bothered him. In fact, several students he'd never spoken to nodded respectfully as they passed. The football players who had formed Marcus's intimidation circle the day before suddenly found reasons to eat at tables far from his. Most tellingly, the section of the cafeteria that had been Marcus's unofficial kingdom sat mostly empty, as if his defeat had broken some spell that had held it together. Sarah Kim approached hesitantly, carrying her lunch tray. "Mind if I sit here?" Ezra gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please." She sat down, glancing around nervously before speaking. "That was intense this morning. I didn't want it to happen. I know." She stirred her soup thoughtfully. "But I'm glad it did. Marcus has been terrorizing people for years. Someone needed to stand up to him." "Where I come from," Ezra said quietly, "respect isn't something you inherit. You earn it." "Where exactly do you come from? I mean, if you don't mind me asking." For the first time in months, Ezra smiled genuinely. "São Paulo. My family moved here so I could have better educational opportunities." "What did you do there? I mean, you fight like..." "Like what?" "Like someone who's done it before. A lot." Ezra considered how much to reveal. The secret he'd guarded so carefully seemed less important now that it was partially out. VALE TUDO. It's Brazilian mixed martial arts. I trained for 8 years. Sarah's eyes widened. "You're like professionally trained." "Was. I had to give it up when we moved." "Why didn't you tell anyone? I mean, Marcus would never have messed with you if he'd known." Ezra was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his uncle's teachings, his parents' sacrifices, and the person he'd tried to become. "At Jefferson High, because I thought being strong meant not having to prove it. I was wrong. The truth was more complicated than that, but Sarah seemed to understand the part he was willing to share." They ate in comfortable silence, occasionally commenting on the strange looks they were getting from other students. It felt normal in a way nothing had since he'd started at Jefferson High. The rest of the week passed in a blur of subtle changes. Teachers who had previously overlooked him in class discussions suddenly called on him more often. Students who had laughed at his humiliations now offered tentative smiles in the hallways. Most significantly, the low-level harassment that had been a constant part of his daily routine simply stopped. Marcus returned from his suspension a different person, quieter, more careful, constantly glancing around as if expecting another confrontation. The easy confidence that had made him dangerous was gone, replaced by the wariness of someone who had learned they weren't invincible. His former followers treated him with the distant politeness reserved for someone whose power had been publicly broken. Tyler and Danny seemed eager to pretend the entire incident had never happened. They went out of their way to avoid Ezra, taking longer routes between classes and choosing different lunch periods when possible. The empire of casual cruelty they'd built around Marcus's personality had crumbled overnight. 2 weeks after the fight, Ezra was leaving school when he heard someone call his name. He turned to find Marcus standing by the bike racks, alone and looking uncomfortable. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Marcus asked. Every instinct told Ezra to walk away, but curiosity won. He approached cautiously, hands loose at his sides. "Out of habit. I wanted to..." Marcus struggled with the words. "I wanted to apologize for everything. The stuff I said, the things we did. It wasn't right." Ezra studied his former tormentor's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden anger. Instead, he saw something that looked like genuine remorse. "Why?" Ezra asked simply. "Because I had time to think during the suspension about what kind of person I was becoming." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "My dad saw the video. He wasn't proud. And I realized I was turning into him. The same guy who used to pick on kids when he was in school, who still thinks it's funny to make people feel small." Marcus met Ezra's eyes. "I don't want to be that person anymore." It wasn't a perfect apology, and it couldn't undo months of humiliation and harassment, but it was honest, and Ezra recognized the courage it took to offer it. "Apology accepted," he said finally, "but this doesn't mean we're friends. I know. I just thank you for stopping when you did. You could have really hurt me. I could have done a lot of things," Ezra replied, "but that's not who I want to be either." Marcus nodded and walked away, leaving Ezra standing alone by the bike racks. The interaction felt like the closing of a chapter he'd never wanted to write in the first place. Spring arrived at Jefferson High, with the usual burst of energy that came with warmer weather and the approaching end of the school year. Ezra had settled into a new routine, that felt more authentic than anything he'd experienced since arriving in Portland. He ate lunch with Sarah and a small group of friends who appreciated his quiet intelligence and dry sense of humor. His grades, no longer dragged down by the constant stress of harassment, improved dramatically. Most importantly, he'd found a balance between the person he'd been in Brazil and the person he wanted to be in America. He still carried himself with the fluid confidence of a trained fighter, but he no longer felt the need to hide that part of himself. When younger students were being picked on, his mere presence was often enough to resolve the situation without violence. The local MMA gym had welcomed him enthusiastically once word of his background spread. Training again felt like coming home, and his uncle would have been proud to see how much his skills had developed during the forced break. More than that, he'd learned something about restraint and timing that no amount of technical training could have taught him. On the last day of school, as he cleaned out his locker, Ezra reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. The quiet, scared kid who had tried to disappear into Jefferson High's background was gone, replaced by someone more complicated, but ultimately more complete. Sarah appeared beside him, her own arms full of textbooks and memories. "So what's the plan for summer?" "Training," Ezra said with a smile, "and maybe some surfing lessons. I hear Oregon's coast is pretty amazing." "It is. Mind some company sometime." "I'd like that." As they walked toward the exit together, Ezra caught sight of Marcus across the hallway, struggling with his own overstuffed locker. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Not friendship, but respect. Ezra returned it. The doors of Jefferson High opened onto a bright June afternoon full of possibilities. Behind him lay months of hard-learned lessons about strength, respect,